Bonjour, welcome. Mon nom est Camille Morin et je suis nouvellement présidente et chef de la direction de la Fédération des sciences humaines. On behalf of the Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences, I am delighted to welcome you to this final featured event at the 93rd Congress of the Humanities and Social Sciences. Our theme today, weaving together past, present, and future. It's an honor to be joined by Shelly Lowe, Chair of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Chair Lowe will delve into how we can leverage the humanities to strengthen democracy, advance equity, and address our changing climate. Today's event will take place in English. We will also be providing simultaneous interpretation and closed captioning in English and French. L'événement se déroulera en anglais, mais nous offrons une interprétation simultanée dans les deux langues. For those joining us in person, to access simultaneous interpretation, you had to refer to the easel located just at the door of this auditorium. Select your preferred language and press listen to hear the interpretation in your earpiece. For those joining us virtually, you can click on the closed captioning button to enable captions, and you can also use the simultaneous interpretation by clicking on that interpretation button and select the language you would like to listen to. Pour utiliser l'interprétation simultanée, cliquez sur le bouton d'interprétation et sélectionnez la langue de votre choix. If you're joining us virtually, we recognize that the following land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you are currently on. So we ask that if that is the case, you take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you're on and the current treaty holders. Here at McGill, we are on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. Nous reconnaissons et remercions les divers peuples autochtones dont la présence marque ce territoire sur lequel nous nous réunissons aujourd'hui, ainsi que pour leurs précieuses contributions passées, présentes et futures. All of our featured events at Congress are held in close collaboration between the Federation and our partners, and I am particularly delighted that today's event is in partnership with the National Endowment for the Humanities, NEH, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, SSHRC, in a unique US-Canada collaboration. This year's overarching theme of sustaining shared futures encourages conversations that reflect on what must be done now to secure a better future. And we know the humanities have a vital role to play in this endeavor. Donc, au nom de la Fédération, merci de vous joindre à nous pour cette conversation. Et je tourne la parole à Ted Hewitt, président du Conseil de recherche en sciences humaines, pour ses remarques d'introduction.
Thank you and welcome everyone. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm Ted Hewitt, as you know, President of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, also known as SSHRC or as SSHRC en français. I'm very pleased to be here with many colleagues from SSHRC, from the National Endowment for the Humanities, of course, from the Federation, and I also want to welcome colleagues from the Fonds de Recherche Québec. I am thrilled today to have the honor of welcoming Dr. Shelly C. Lowe, Chair of the National Endowment for the Humanities, who is here to speak with us today on weaving together past, present, and future. The NEH is one of the largest funders of humanities programs in the United States, and like SSHRC here in Canada, plays an important role in supporting research excellence and generating knowledge and insights about people and societies. Chair Lowe's experience and leadership at the NEH will offer us a unique perspective on the role of humanities in illuminating the human condition and in doing so, improving lives and communities. Je continue en français. Madame Lowe est citoyenne de la nation Navajo. Elle a grandi dans la réserve Navajo à Ganado, en Arizona. Au cours de sa carrière dans l'enseignement supérieur, Elle a été directrice générale du Harvard University Native American Program, vice-doyenne au bureau de doyen du Yale College et directrice du Native American Cultural Center de la Yale University. De 2015 à 2022, nommée par le président Obama, elle a été membre du National Council on the Humanities, l'organe consultatif des 26 membres du National Endowment for the Humanities. En février 2022, elle est devenue présidente du National Endowment for the Humanities. Le National Endowment for the Humanities soutient la recherche, l'éducation, la préservation et les programmes publics dans le domaine des sciences humaines. Sa mission est de renforcer l'enseignement et l'apprentissage dans les écoles et les universités, de faciliter la recherche et l'érudition ainsi que de préserver les ressources culturelles et intellectuelles et d'y donner accès. Switch back to English. Similarly, SSHRC is dedicated to promoting and supporting research and training in the humanities and social sciences, to contribute to the advancement of knowledge and the well-being of Canadians. Our two organizations obviously have a lot in common and we speak often, and that means a lot of potential for closer collaboration, which is why it gives me great pleasure to announce that this morning, SSHRC and the NEH formalized a memorandum of understanding towards collaborative efforts to advance research in the humanities on a global scale. And with this new partnership, we look forward to a future of new and exciting cooperation in research and research training in the humanities. Now, please join me in welcoming our esteemed guest, Chair Dr. Shelly Lowe.
Thank you so much, Ted. Greetings. Hello, everybody. It is such a pleasure to be with you all today to talk a little bit about the work that we do at NEH, particularly how we ensure that we bring humanities to more people across the United States, but also beyond the United States. I am just delighted that Ted has been able to announce that this morning NEH and SSHRC signed a memorandum of understanding to work together to foster an exchange of information and scholarly research in the humanities and to advance Indigenous research. And we're just so delighted to be able to do this work together. So thank you so much, Ted, and your colleagues at SSHRC for bringing that forward. I also want to acknowledge my NEH colleagues who have helped with this memorandum of understanding, but who are also in the room with me today. And thank you so much for being here. I want to talk a little bit today, not just about the work that we do at NEH and the work that we do to foster humanities in the United States, but also a little bit about how I come to understanding this work. So yeah, Chair Shelly Lowe in the chef, Belgana Nishlan, Anastasia Tajini Bashichi, Belgana Dashiche, Dotraba Dashanala, Kantia, Danasha, Ada, Washington, Dishagan. My name is Shelly Lowe. I'm Navajo and I grew up on the Navajo Reservation. I'm chair of the National Endowment for the Humanities and I live and work in Washington, D.C. And one of my favorite writers is the Navajo poet Lucy Tapahanso. She's also a good friend and a mentor. And she writes in her poem, A Blessing, may each of us remember to share our stories with one another, because it is only through stories that we live full lives. And to me, the humanities are those stories. They're a roadmap of where we've been and where we are going, of how to move through the world and of how to dream. Poetry and history and philosophy teach us how to read, how to analyze, and critically how to live. Growing up on the Navajo Reservation, I loved listening to stories. Stories of people who are strong and caring. Navajo culture is matrilineal, and women play a very important role in our culture. And I was learning every day from the stories of mothers and aunties and daughters and grandmothers, stories about how to care for each other, how to listen. In one Navajo tradition, we celebrate a baby's first laugh, and it's a reminder to be generous and to support young minds. Through this tradition, we are ensuring the youngest members of our community that they are not alone in this world, We are saying you have family, you have friends, they are around you, they are walking with you every step of the way. And the humanities remind us that we are also in community. We are not alone, so long as we tell our stories, and so long as we listen. One NEH initiative I'm especially proud of is called American Tapestry, weaving together past, present, and future. It emphasizes the role the humanities can play in strengthening our democracy, advancing equity for all, and addressing our changing climate. In short, American Tapestry answers one of the most important questions. How can we be better human beings? American Tapestry is furthering NEH's longstanding commitment to support community colleges, historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges and universities, and other minority serving institutions. And this initiative includes new grant programs, one called Spotlight on the Humanities in Higher Education, that supports the development of small projects that benefit historically underserved populations through the teaching and study of humanities at 2- and 4-year colleges and universities and higher education nonprofits. NEH has also partnered with the Department of the Interior to expand the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative through the collection of oral histories and the digitization of federal records documenting the experiences of survivors and descendants of U.S. federal Indian boarding schools. I've had the opportunity to be on some of Secretary Howland's Road to Healing listening tours as part of this important work, and I've heard directly from boarding school survivors and descendants, people who were torn away from their parents and their brothers and sisters, who were forced to speak another language, to cut their hair, and to erase their history. Many of these children grew up never knowing the love of their parents, of their grandparents, never learning what it means to be part of a tight-knit family, never having a chance to have family around every step of the way. As one gentleman explained to us, the federal government raised me. And in one listening session, a 92-year-old woman told us she had never spoken about her experience in a boarding school until that day. And she had endured so much for so long to finally, with her husband and her daughter right next to her, she said she finally felt like she could speak and tell her own story. And I think this is critical to reflect on. The humanities allow us to pause and reflect. But the humanities are not about speaking for others. They are about giving people, all people, a chance to tell their own stories. And that's why being still and listening are such important skills. Because if we move too quickly, if we don't listen to each other, we'll miss these stories of pain and hope, these stories that make us who we are. I recently read a memoir by Lindsay Nixon. She's a writer and a member of the Cree, Saulteaux, and Métis Nations. Lindsay opens with an essay on love and how it can be buried under trauma, like the violence inflicted on Native people. The opening essay reads, "If love seems impossible for me and my Plains kin, it's only because they came into our homes in the middle of the night and stole our babies from our beds. They shackled them in tiny handcuffs and sent them miles and miles away, where they were put into prisons, alone, frightened, hungry, and cold." And Lindsay writes that the world hardened us. A cynicism clouded the community's view, but that is not the end of the story. It's never the end of the story. Lindsay comes to the realization that love is larger than her and more powerful. And the essay concludes, "To love as deliberately as I burn sage, to love as ceremony, to love hard, well, that's where my dominion lives." To love is a very powerful act, and I believe our work in the humanities is an act of love. It acknowledges the uncomfortable parts of our history or our present, and it says this history or this present must be confronted. Because it's only when we do this work, when we dig into the archives, when we interview the descendants, we look this pain in the eyes, that we can get to the truth. And that too is our task in the humanities, to be truth tellers, to say this history or this current time is often complex and sometimes gruesome, but we cannot ignore it. We need to acknowledge it, and we need to keep digging. NEH's Division of Research Programs supports this work every day. In 2020, NEH awarded a research grant to Michael Carrasco of Florida State University to write a book on the origins of early writing in Mesoamerica, using a range of theoretical models, new discoveries, and recent field research to better understand the role of writing in early civilizations. The Cheyenne River Youth Project in South Dakota received an NEH research grant in 2022 to develop a Lakota language internship for teens, drawing on the history of Lakota ceremonies, foodways, storytelling, and writing to preserve and protect the Lakota culture. And in 2022, Julie Reed of Pennsylvania State University was awarded a research grant to co-author a new book on the history of the Cherokee Nation, one that addresses issues of gender and race, as well as the history of the last 60 years. Carrie Eggleston received an NEH Dynamic Language Infrastructure Documenting Endangered Languages grant in 2014 to expand a Tlingit language database with an additional 500 verbs through fieldwork with speakers, bringing to light the complexity and beauty of the endangered language. Projects like these are critical, projects that let people tell their own stories and in their own languages. At the National Book Festival last year, I sat down with the former U.S. Poet Laureate Joy Harjo of the Muskogee Creek Nation to discuss her new children's book, Remember. Remember tells the story of a girl who recalls her ancestors, the stars, the moon, and in a very gorgeous tale, we travel with this girl and we dream her dreams. And Joy says that poems are carried in our memory and live in our heart. They are always with you. Her eagle poem is especially moving. It is a blessing, a call to open ourselves up to the world, to the sky, to the earth, and to the quiet moments. To remember that life moves like an eagle, circled in blue sky. Our task, Joy writes, is to believe in the future and to believe in beauty. Believing in beauty can mean following new paths and trusting that you will find your way. Years ago, I was an undergraduate at the University of Arizona, and after I failed calculus as a math major, I started taking American Indian Studies and sociology classes. And suddenly everything shifted for me. Whole worlds opened up. Worlds of language, of artistry, of meaning making. The humanities, although I would not have called them that at the time, were setting me down paths I didn't know existed, and paths that I'm still traveling today. When I was growing up, I was often asked if I lived in a teepee. And to this day, people come up and tell me they didn't know Native people still exist, either in the United States or in Canada. And as I see it, that's a kind of failing. It's a failure to see those around us, to ask the right questions, and to be open to difficult answers. It's very easy to live in a silo, to tune out the perspectives of those that are different from us. But it's only when we take a step and then another out of our comfort zone, when we listen for new answers, that we learn something we did not know before. So people often ask me, how can I support Natives? Where can I go to learn more? And I tell them consistently, you have to go to Native people. You have to ask them. You have to let them tell their stories, and you have to always, always listen. The humanities are about wrestling with different views and ideas. They invite us to consider new perspectives. And when you read a biography or a novel, or you watch a documentary or a play, you're saying to yourself, I might not agree with these people, but I'm better for knowing them. The historian James M. Banner Jr. in the summer 2022 issue of Humanities magazine wrote an article entitled, All History is Revisionist History, based on his book of the same theme. Banner opens up with an observation that the collective noun for a group of historians is an argumentation, and for good reason. Thoughtful debate, Banner argues, is central to the project of historians. History, by its very nature, is ever evolving, and in Banner's view, it is always more than names and dates. Mere facts, he writes, don't have meaning, they must be given that meaning by human beings. And the debates that rise when we discuss history are not just intellectual exercises. They are, in Banner's words, a contribution to understanding and to the welfare of an open society. So our task as scholars is to make room for that debate. We need a clear path for our students, for our peers, for our neighbors, for our friends, and sometimes for ourselves, to think critically about the past. Almost a quarter of American adults have not read a book in whole or in part in the past year, whether in print or electronic or in audio form, according to a 2021 Pew survey. And that is very disheartening because those are stories that are lost. Those are people that are lost. And this is where the humanities come in. They offer us a different way to see the world, a world we've long known. They offer us a perspective we didn't consider, a path we dared not follow, a voice we could not yet hear. As Joy Harjo said, poetry gave me the words to speak what had no words. As an undergraduate, I also shadowed my mentor as she traveled across the United States. She traveled to many tribal communities and attended many tribal conferences. And I remembered realizing that I knew what it meant to be Navajo, but I didn't know many other Native nations beyond my own. And there was so much more for me to learn. I came to understand that studying the histories and traditions of those that are different from us is the work of the humanities. And I think this is important to say. It's not about becoming someone else or adopting another culture as our own. It's about understanding. It's about knowing how somebody else moves through the world because they too are human beings in your life. They too are your neighbors. Last year, I read Tara Westover's memoir, Educated. Tara received the National Humanities Medal from President Biden in 2022. And her memoir tells the story of her turbulent childhood in a Mormon family in Southeast Idaho. She was the youngest of 7. She was abused, and she was considered homeschooled and received no formal education growing up. But she had a voracious hunger to learn, and she tested so well on her ACTs that she was admitted to Brigham Young University, then to Cambridge and Harvard University on fellowships, finally returning to Cambridge University to complete her PhD in history. Westover says she was saved by books, and the humanities for her were a kind of lifeline. She took what little she had and she wrote down her own story. A story of courage, a story of someone making a way out of no way, and a story of new futures. On a visit last year to Racing Magpie, an arts organization in Rapid City, South Dakota, I saw an extraordinary work on paper diamonds assembled into a star and lettered with verse from the Oglala Lakota poet Layli Long Soldier. The work draws from the Lakota concept Mitakuya Yasin, which means we are all related. One of the poems is titled Obligations To. It tells the story of a community in tatters grappling with a difficult past. It can be read horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. You choose the point where you start. But here's one way to read it. As we embrace the future, we work to understand. The grief we shift into light. What I think is so beautiful about Layli's poem is it begins with loss, a community understanding its grief, but then it shifts. The community remembers, broken like the fragments of the diamond pattern, and are able to turn their pain into light, and they are able to do so together. When my grandparents were still living in Arizona, I would visit them at least 3, 4 more times a year. And to get to them, I had to fly into a major city and then drive about an hour out. And where they lived, there was very bad cell service. They did not have internet. And there was nothing to do but be with them. So I tag along as they visited friends or they did their shopping. I spent a lot of time on those trips just listening. I was taught that elders hold a special place in our communities, that they are revered. Approaching someone from that place of reverence and respect is part of our work in the humanities. When we meet with community members, we are giving them a chance to teach us something new. We are listening. And now more than ever, it's easy to talk over and past each other. You can hear it in an interview that's gone wrong, when it seems like the interviewer isn't listening to their guest. So focused are they on getting to the next question. So focused are they on being on time. But the humanities teach us to slow down, to pause and reflect. When you read a novel, it's just you and the text. There are no notifications or emails or calls, I hope. It's just the author telling you a story, as your grandmother might tell you a story, or your best friend might tell you. It's a chance to just listen and to be surprised. The first Native American writer I was introduced to is the novelist Louise Erdrich of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. In her National Book Award-winning novel, The Round House, she tells the heartrending story of a boy named Joe, whose mother is violently attacked. And seen through his perspective, this coming-of-age novel examines what it means to seek justice, to come to terms with a trauma too paralyzing to name. At one point, Joe comes to an important realization. Now that I knew fear, he thinks, I also knew it was not permanent. As powerful as it was, its grip on me would loosen. It would pass. And it's stories like these that make the humanities so vital. Seeing characters work through trauma gives us the skills to do the same. It's like sitting down with your grandparents and asking them about their life. Sometimes what they share is charming or sarcastic or light, but sometimes it's painful. And we need all of those stories because it's the humanities that gives us strength. What I've learned about communities across the country, from listening tours and in my own life, is that they are extremely resilient. They have a self-determination about them, an ability to imagine new and better futures for themselves. One of the questions Navajos were wrestling with when I was growing up was, how do we both preserve our culture and move it forward? And it's a critical question in the humanities because history, as you all know, is not written and sealed off. It is debated and argued. And in many oral traditions, there are stories we don't write down because they are meant to be spoken. They are meant to take on new forms and new meanings over time. And I think that's another case for the humanities. They allow for a kind of flexibility of thought. They are not about a winner and a loser. They are about taking complex ideas and understanding them deeply and fully. Last October, I was in Indianapolis for the National Humanities Conference. And in one of the sessions, we met with council members from our Pacific Islands Humanities Councils. It's important that we know each other, one of the Chamorro women said in the discussion. And as she put it, if we don't know each other, we will act out of fear. And that's important for us to think about. The humanities are essential. We are helping people to know each other. We are dispelling fears. We are saying these are our brothers and sisters, and their stories are our stories. Lucy Tapahanso, the Navajo poet I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, observed in a recent interview how stories form the contours of her life. As she states, even before I learned to read, I was surrounded by stories and the language of traditional rituals and memories that formed a blueprint. We all have stories, and so we're all storytellers. I think, she says, we are like vaults ready to be opened. And what a way of existing in the world, to think of each other as storytellers, as vaults ready to be opened. I wonder how that might change the rhetoric we hear every single day. Lucy's poem of blessing ends this way. May we live in the way of beauty and help others in need. May we always remember that we were created as people who believe in one another. And today and in the days to come, I hope that you will believe in one another and seek out new stories and never forget there is wonder all around us as long as we ask questions, as long as we listen for answers. Because we can all choose to live in the way of beauty and gain strength from our work in the humanities. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chair Lowe, for sharing about the work of the NEH, but leaving in your personal stories and encounters you've had. I'm hoping that the audience is ready to ask some questions because we have a bit of time, and I think we could learn a lot from both how you've experienced the humanities and how the NEH carries on this work. But if people in the audience are too shy, I see a hand right in the front. Thank you. Microphone will be coming.
I just want to present myself. I'm very happy with your story. So Marie-Thérèse Batardière from the University of Limerick in Ireland. And we work a lot on stories, but I'm going on another tangent. So I'm actually very involved in linguistics, in languages, and it's just a delight. I'm delighted to be in Canada. It's just a beautiful country for that. How does languages come into play in your stories? Please.
For myself.
This is a whole, in general, if you want.
Okay.
You don't have to be as you wish.
All right, so I'm Navajo. I grew up on Navajo reservation, but I was not taught to speak Navajo. I'm like many others in my generation. We were taught to speak English, and it was expected that we would speak English and speak English very well. Our parents and our grandparents thought that that was the best place for us to be. That was the best skill for us to have, and not to be speaking Navajo. You know, a lot of it because of the boarding schools and the effects of the boarding schools, but this idea that we would move on forward in education much easier if we knew English. So I will be a lifelong Navajo language learner. And I think that there are times when I say to myself, I could go home and I could live back home and in years, I might be able to be fairly fluent in Navajo. But I would have to make that choice and I'd have to really work at it. I had the opportunity to continue language learning away from the reservation. So in my office, the staff can attest, I often listen to our Navajo radio station on my computer. And so I can hear it, so I can get used to what it sounds like. And we have many opportunities now to learn Navajo online or through Rosetta Stone. But I think what I understand is that language provides so much more knowledge that we cannot translate in English, or we cannot translate into other languages in ways that give us the understanding that the language intends for us to have in certain contexts, in certain meanings, in certain ways and things that are happening. And I think that much of the work that we do at NEH, particularly as we support moving forward in the United States with the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative, is to allow tribal communities to draw back on their language strength, to rebuild that in the best way that they can and in the manner that they want to, because that loss of language and culture is something that we really want to address, and we really want to help communities move forward. But our agency also does work with NSF, National Science Foundation, to support endangered languages across the world. And a lot of the work that comes out of that really does help create dictionaries or grammars, even online dictionaries that we see. So it's a very important topic for the agency. And it's something that, you know, I grapple with all the time, but I don't speak any French, so.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. I'm just wondering, what can be done now to address intellectual property issues in cultural heritage?
I think that's a very good question. And, you know, a lot of our work is about preserving cultural heritage. It's about bringing that cultural heritage forward so more people can have access to it, right? So sometimes we give funding to digitize materials or to digitize with photography things, but we have to always be aware that there are some types of knowledge, images that communities don't want to have shared, right? That they need to say that this should not be shared with the wider public, or this should not be shared with men. It's something that's only for women. So one of the projects that NEH has supported is Mercatu and traditional knowledge labels, which allow organizations, museums, universities to create labels for their digital resources that allow them to be only open to certain individuals. That gives a little bit more of a kind of a protection against some of the sharing of that knowledge that communities don't want. But I think it's very important to understand that, you know, as we move into a much more digital world, as we move forward with all the growth in artificial intelligence, we have to be having these conversations about what information should be available freely and publicly. What does that information come with, right? What kind of knowledge comes with those images? And those conversations have to be had with the creators of that knowledge, those communities, those tribes, or those societies that created it, when and if at all possible. So one of the new areas that we are putting a lot of focus into is artificial intelligence. How do we have those conversations about the ethics of AI, how we're going to use that? How do we create some research to look into that and really inform ourselves on what's the best way to move forward in all of this? Because it's going to move so fast and we're going to see so many changes coming. We need to be prepared ourselves.
You started off describing work in humanities as an act of love, and I thought we could have said it's an act of courage. So I wonder if you'd sort of speak to times when you might have thought of stepping back or stepping away, or how anyone you is maybe a little hesitant to continue forward. Act of courage in the humanities.
You know, what I generally say about humanities, one is that they are our creation stories, right? If we think about those teachings that guide us and who we are as human beings, it's the creation stories that inform us. Then I say that, like I said in my talk, that humanities allow us to pause and reflect so that we can step for a moment and say, what am I looking at? What am I dealing with? What is going on? And let me think about this for a minute. And then if we use the skills and the tools from the humanities, then that can give us the courage and the strength to move forward in the right ways, hopefully, right? There's always that in the right way. So I don't know if I have any particular example, except for, the work that we're doing with the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative and the Department of the Interior. I know, we often watch in the United States how Canada has moved through this issue, how Australia has moved through this issue. And there have been calls for many years, why has the United States not done this? And we've reached a point in time, I think in the United States, we have Secretary Holland running the Department of the Interior. We needed this Native individual to say it's time, we have to move this forward. But I admire her so much because we're taking the time that we need, or that we feel that we need. We're pausing, we're reflecting, we're listening to the stories. Because this is new for us, right? This is the first time that we in the United States are really putting this history forward and starting to deal with it. And we're trying to ensure that on our side with NEH, we're supporting then those skills, those tools that are going to give us the courage, right? And the strength to move forward through this, because it's going to be hard. Like, it's going to be very hard. It's been hard for many communities, but I guess that's one example.
Not that love and courage are mutually exclusive at all. I'm going to use up this time, folks, if you're not going to. So obviously fundamentals of humanities literacy. But now we've seen literacy talked about in the context of digital literacy, data literacy, literacy of social media. What about humanities literacy? What do we need to understand fundamentally? Although you've spoken to that in many ways, but in summary, why is the humanities and literacy of humanities so important? I'm letting you expand on your note, on your remarks, but
That's a very good question. If you think about humanities literacy, one of my first thoughts is going back to how do we define literacy? Is it reading a book? Is it listening very intently to a story that somebody is telling you? Can you learn the same thing from the two different ways of getting that knowledge, right? And getting that understanding. I think that one of the more important parts of literacy in humanities, and I try to explain to individuals, right? What is it that we are doing here at NEH in the simplest way possible? Because if you've never tried to explain to the public what humanities is, right? You all have a really good definition for humanities that the public understands, right? Please tell me, because I need that. The everyday person, if I said the humanities, they might have an inkling of what that means, but it may not be exactly what I think that I need them to understand the humanities as being. So the first part of it is saying, we can answer very easily who, what, and where, right? That kind of information. People understand that fairly easily, right? We can say that, and that's part of literacy. The other part of the literacy and the humanities part of it is how do you answer the how and the why? How did this happen? Why did this happen? Based on the facts that you already had. And I think that's where, for me, literacy can come in a written form. Literacy may come through listening and hearing it, or recording that we have, some oral histories that we take. The more important thing is to ensure that in 250 years, we have what we need to answer all of the questions, not just the what, when, and the where, but the how and the why, right? That we can say, oh, let's look back here. We can answer that question, right? We're just trying to make sure the materials, the resources, the cultural heritage is preserved, it's saved, and it can help us in the future to answer these really complex questions that I know we always are gonna have.
that will help me in my job. Thank you very much.
I might have just a few remarks. I'm actually working on definition of intercultural literacy. So it's interesting.
Please use a microphone for the video recording.
I'm actually working on a definition of intercultural literacy, just because of the field I'm in. I had another question I was interested in to ask you here, going back to language in Norway and about stories. Because I live in Ireland, and Ireland it's a very deep country, it's just a beautiful country. And they rely a lot on orality. Do you feel the exact same about your people? You mentioned a poem, probably songs. Can you tell us a bit more about this importance of the oral relationship with people?
Yes, and I think one of the ways to maybe give you an example about how the oral history, oral traditions really help us to inform how we move forward. A number of the staff and I were just in Hawaii for the Festival of Pacific Arts and Cultures. And you have to really kind of step out of your expectations of the normal, what a big convening might be like and what is supposed to happen. We were at the opening ceremony, and all of the 26 islands that had come in for the festival across the Pacific were all going to be coming in. They were presenting themselves, presenting their cultures, presenting their members, and presenting gifts to the governor and the First Lady of Hawaii. And on our schedule, it's set for 4 hours. So we get there, half hour early, it starts half hour late. It gets started, maybe 2 hours in. The MCs, there's 2 MCs, make it very clear that this will happen in the time frame that it needs to happen. Right, that we are not timing ourselves, we are not telling people you only have this much time. You will bring your community members out, you will bring your delegation, you will do what it is that you feel like you need to do, and then we'll move on to the next one. We were there for 8.5 hours. It was beautiful, it was wonderful, and it didn't feel like 8.5 hours. But every group that came out had a person who spoke on behalf of the island and the delegation. And every single speaker shared wisdom and knowledge that they had brought with them from their own traditional teachings, that in many cases were shared traditions and shared teachings. And if we hadn't had 8.5 hours listening to these teachings, seeing the beauty of their performances and understanding the gifts that were given, we couldn't have gone into the rest of that convening or the rest of the festival in the right mindset. Right, they needed to ground us, those of us who are not from the Pacific, as much as they needed to ground themselves in the island and with each other. And I thought it was one of the most beautiful ways to kind of really put people into going into the rest of the festivities in the way that they needed us to. And that was all done orally. There was nothing written, nothing. It was just listening, hearing each of the perspectives and hearing the teachings that they wanted to tell us. And it went very late, but it was, it was probably a semester's worth of learning in about 8 hours. It was wonderful. It's beautiful.
Follow up on what you
If-
said, how do
please.
you think we could foster listening? Thank you so much. So following up on what you just said, how do you think we could, as teachers, foster a greater listening attitude? And I think that is so important. You can see this politically. Everybody wants to talk over the other person, or at meetings, or even getting our students to speak up. It's very difficult. People are afraid that they're going to be rejected or insulted, perhaps, or bad things will happen to them. They feel their freedom of speech is threatened. Anyway, I don't need to go on. You know what I'm talking about, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about how could we foster this very respectful and open listening on all levels. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. That's a very good question. We have to be able to create those spaces, and we need to be intentional about creating those spaces. So when we started attending the Road to Healing listening sessions with Secretary Holland, there was a very specific ask of community members when we came in. So we would come in, the secretary would introduce herself, she would give a little bit of information about the boarding school initiative, and she would make it very clear, I'm here to listen to students who had attended boarding schools or their family members. She said, I'm not here to speak, I'm just here to sit and listen. And then they would make it very clear that there may be other issues that you want to talk about, but that's not what we are here for today. We are here to sit and listen. And sometimes they would sit and listen for 6-7 hours, and just individuals would come up. They were not interrupted for the most part. They were asked and just encouraged to share their story. And then, it created this very kind of respectful environment where somebody would share their story and understand the next person over here also wants to share their story. So I will stop talking now and turn to, this person that I may not know, but let them share their story. And it was very intentional in creating that kind of open space of, getting rid of titles, although we all know it's Secretary Holland, we all know, she has her security are there, but she would sit down. She wouldn't stand except when she spoke at the beginning. She would cry, right? But she listened and she stayed right there. Some people tried to come and, really talk right in front of her, but she was very respectful the whole time. One of the other experiences that we had in Hawaii, we have 56 state and jurisdictional councils that are our state partners across the United States, and they do a lot of work locally in the communities, very community focused, and meeting the needs in the communities. We had the opportunity to attend, it's called, I forgot the title of it. it's a program in one of the men's prisons in Honolulu. And we come in, they know, they might have received my title but they don't know anything about kind of the work that I'm doing or, my job. And there's kind of a question posed to the prisoners and the individuals who come in to visit, and we just talk and it goes back and forth. And the way that they do it is they, in some instances, people will have a stick or something that, you can't speak until you have this stick. They had a little yarn ball that they had all created their first session. And if you wanted to speak, you could raise your hand and they could throw this ball back and forth because it was soft and you could grab all the yarn pieces. It was very oddly colored, but or if they felt like somebody wasn't talking and they wanted to hear from them, they could throw it to somebody and say, well, I want you to talk. I want you to say something. And they had been doing this. This was their 8th session and when I came in. But they were very open and, they would pass back and forth. They would notice if somebody wasn't talking. They had kind of created for themselves this arena where it was safe to talk about whatever you wanted to talk about. It was safe to say if you were not comfortable and you didn't want to talk and just pass the yarn ball back on. And they were just so excited and happy and, they literally say, this is what keeps me going because this is what gives me my humanity back while I'm in this prison. I can at least come here and I can be my person and tell my story and share my thoughts. And so that was just another example of one of the ways that, you take away titles, you sit down, you create an atmosphere where people feel like they are open to talk, it's comfortable, and they're not going to be judged or asked.
Hi, thank you. You mentioned that being still and listening are fundamental. But of course, these concepts are up against a capitalist system that demands profit, action, and is fundamentally anti-humanities in many ways. So my question is, how do you survive? How does humanities survive in the face of a capitalist system that is seemingly growing and growing at a nonstop rate?
Well, this is going to sound a little ironic. We have to tell our stories the right way. And when I say that, I think one of our biggest challenges at NEH is telling the story of the impact that we have. What does our work actually do? Both on the ground, but nationally, how does our funding really support the things that we are trying to support? Strengthening democracy, equity for all, addressing our changing climate, looking at artificial intelligence. We have to tell that story in a way that people understand. And that changes all the time, right? Because now how do you tell a story? You do it through a post, you do it through a photo. You don't necessarily sit down and talk to an audience anymore. So knowing the right way to tell your story, knowing the right avenues to tell your story, and knowing, really understanding who your audience is and how you get that story to them. And then we do have to, have enough data to be able to say, this is the impact that we have. So at NEH, we have created an Office of Data and Evaluation because we need to tell our story better and we need to tell our story based on our data. And it's something that we have needed to do for quite a while. We had an office years ago, but we haven't had one for a number of years. And it does come down to data and having to be able to pull that data, having to be able to then present that data in the right way to get people to really understand it. This is going to be a long process for NEH because we haven't had somebody for so long, right? Because we have so much data. But we need to get it into a format and into the right kind of material that we can understand ourselves, right? Because we need to understand it first, but then to be able to share that and to say to, corporations, to say to governments, this is what we do, and this is why it's so important, and this is the impact that it's having. And part of that goes back to everybody else having to share the impact of their stories as well. It can't just be the agency, right? We all do work in the humanities. How do you tell your humanities story to the public so they understand the importance of what you do or the importance of what you are supporting? It's really hard. And if you have answers to that, please come talk to me because we need to know.
I was gonna say, please let your colleagues have data and evaluation, you won't be calling them. I think we can probably have another question. Is there one? I would have many, but I thank the audience. Well, first I want to thank you, Chair Lowe, for sharing those insights with us very generously, very personally. So it's my privilege on behalf of the Federation for Humanities and Social Sciences to thank National Endowment for the Humanities, your colleagues, as well as you for being with us, and as well as friends, colleagues from Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council for the partnership that made this event possible. For those who would like to revisit or let others know that the video will be available on the Congress virtual platform in the coming days, and it'll be up until July 31st. And then final words in French, merci d'avoir été avec nous aujourd'hui, merci à tous ceux qui participent, et j'espère que vous passerez une bonne journée. See jusqu'à demain, la fin du congrès. Thank you for being with us, and I hope you enjoy the remaining of today and our congress tomorrow. Merci, thank you.